In this lesson, we'll begin by establishing the underlying structure of our female's torso. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so basically in this course, we're going to be learning about how to draw a female body with realistic proportions and surface anatomy. Along the way, we'll be talking about how not only to draw, but visualize different parts of the body to achieve this. So the first thing we really want to nail down is how many heads tall will our female subject be. Now this can vary, but the average person is around 7 to 7.5 heads tall. So if we navigate over here to our layers panel, I have a layer which I've titled head. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the visibility for that, and we have our female head here which I've drawn. And on the layer above this I've titled head height. So let's go ahead and turn on the visibility for that. And basically what I've done is, based off of our female head here, I've made markers all the way down to establish how many heads tall our female subject will be. So we have one head here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So she's going to be about 7 heads tall, maybe just a little bit more. Now if you were drawing this female, say for a comic book, you probably want to go even further than that as far as how many heads tall. You may want to do 9, 9.5, maybe all the way up to 10.5 heads tall to really exaggerate the proportions. Something like a comic book where you've got a lot of action poses, things like that, you really want to really push those proportions so you have something that looks a little bit more visually appealing and just something that has a little bit more pizzazz to it. But again, we're kind of going for something that fits a little bit more in with reality. So 7 heads tall seems appropriate in this case. So having these markers here is also going to allow us to gauge where to place the torso, the legs, the arms, and just where they're going to fit and be placed overall here. So if you can imagine, if we separate ourselves from this top head just for a moment, if you can imagine the body basically being split in half, where we have the torso that'll take up these 3 head spaces right here, and then these bottom 3 head spaces will be reserved for the legs. And so just knowing that, that's already going to give us a little bit of direction as to where to place different parts of the body. And we really want to start with the torso and work our way out from there. So again, the torso is basically going to take up these 3 head spaces right in here, these 3 head heights. So before we begin even drawing the form of the torso or any kind of surface anatomy, we really want to establish some underlying structure. So over here in our layers panel, I have a layer which I've titled collarbone/spine. Let's go ahead and turn on the visibility for that. And you can see I've got a T that I've drawn. So what is this T for, and what does it represent, and what can we do with it? Well, basically this T, the vertical part of this T rather, represents the spine. So that's basically the placement of the spine running through our female subject here. The horizontal top of this T is going to allow us to establish the placement of the collarbone or the clavicle. Okay, so this underlying structure, this T right here, is going to allow us to gauge other underlying structures, such as the rib cage, and then coming down here below we can establish the pelvic bone as well. So this T really acts as an anchor point or a marker point for us to draw and place those underlying shapes appropriately. So we want to go ahead and start with the rib cage. So on this layer over here above my collarbone/spine, I've got a layer titled rib cage shape. Now why did I add the word shape on the end of that? Well, basically we're not going to get super technical in drawing all the individual ribs or getting really technical with all the underlying bones in the body. We're going to keep it really simple and just kind of simplify those different bones into simple shapes. So I'm just going to grab my brush tool over here in the tool panel, and we'll just go ahead and zoom in a little bit. And we're going to work in just a very simple shape for the ribs. Again, we want to have this underlying structure which will allow us to draw the overall form of the body over that. So I'm going to kind of start, you'll notice there's kind of a point right here on this T, and I'm basically going to start from there and work out an overall shape for the rib cage. And so again, this is why I like to start with the T, because it allows me to gauge these underlying structures and figure out the placement of these shapes a little bit more accurately. So for the ribs, I like to imagine them as being kind of like a upside down U shape, or maybe a horseshoe shape, or kind of a hoof shape. So that's kind of the shape we're working out right now. And then these areas right here, where it kind of curves around, if she were really skinny and we could really see her ribs, these would kind of be the areas that would be most visually evident. So these right here, the ribs are pretty close to the surface of the skin than, say, the pelvic bone. And so these parts of the ribs right here, kind of on the bottom, would be the parts you would probably see pretty easily kind of poking out. Okay, so that's basically our shape for our rib cage here. Let's go ahead and work our way down and figure out what we want to do for the pelvic bone area. So on another layer above our rib cage shape layer, I've got a layer titled pelvic shape. So we're going to make sure we're on that layer and turn on the visibility for that. So what kind of shape would we have for the pelvic bone? Well, basically women's hips are a lot wider than men's. A lot of their balance is concentrated in their hips, whereas with men, a lot of their balance is concentrated up here in the upper part of their torso, kind of up here in this upper area where we got the shoulders, and then everything just kind of tapers down. With women, it's not like that. They have more of an hourglass figure, and that has a lot to do with that hip shape. So for the hips, there's a lot going on in this area with this pelvic bone, and we're just going to make it very simple. I like to think of this overall pelvic shape as kind of being like a heart. So again, I'm kind of starting off that center point of the spine right here to kind of establish the midpoint of that heart shape. Okay? And then just coming around the other side. Now you could also imagine this shape as kind of a butterfly shape too. If you were to kind of cut out this bottom area right here, that would kind of give you that butterfly shape. Now the reason I'm cutting out this bottom area is because this kind of pubic bone area, this pubic area, it's a lot wider on women than it is in men. A lot of this has to do probably with their being able to bear children. And so that's why they have wider hips and a wider pubic area. So later on when we get into drawing that space in between the legs, where the legs are attached to this area here, this pelvic area, there's going to be a little bit more space here than you would normally draw on a male subject. All right. Okay, so we basically have the information we need now, the underlying structure for the upper part of our body, the torso. And so we just worked in some very simple shapes here that are going to allow us to draw the form around this. And again, I like to start with that T shape. Now, one final thing I would like to point out about that T shape is the placement of that T. In case you've been wondering, you're probably wondering why that vertical part of the T starts where it is. Why does this T start right here? I like to basically think of where the collarbone, again, is going to be. And so I've basically brought the horizontal part of this T about 1/4 of the way down into this second head shape. So if you can imagine 1/4 of a head size from the bottom of her chin to the top of that T, that's basically where you would ideally like to start that. And then from there, we work in our shapes for our underlying structure. So in the next lesson, we're going to focus in on drawing the form around our underlying structures for our female subject.